Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker. This time I'm going to be ranking the AI based on each individual race, with a couple of exceptions, in Total War Warhammer 3. So each race doesn't just perform exactly the same, and there are some races that are more cunning than others, and that's what I'm going to be grading them on, based on how they perform on the battlefield and also on the campaign. But before we get into the tier list, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. You guys know I've been with Manscaped for ages. Love the products, love working with them. The White Hot Edition Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is the all-purpose electric razor you know and love. I prefer to spend as little time in the bathroom as possible. Using Manscaped products, I have a tendency to rush the job because I know I'm not going to cut myself. That means less time shaving, more time gaming. Time is precious. Why waste it being careful when you've got Manscaped doing that for you? I don't shave every day, but when I do it in less than 5 minutes, thanks to the Lawnmower 5.0. Check out the link in the description or the pinned comment and get 15% off the special edition of the Lawnmower 5.0. Big thanks to Manscaped, as always, for sponsoring this video. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the tier list itself. So, big distinction that needs to be made here is that this is grading on a curve. In fact, pretty much all of my tier lists, I try to make sure I'm grading on a curve, but I really need to make that distinction here, because if I put anything under cunning, without making this distinction, you can bet there's going to be so many people saying, oh my god, how can you say any AI in Total War is intelligent? It's all stupid. We're going to probably get a lot of that anyway from people that don't even watch the video. They'll just put that in there because they saw the title. It is what it is. But like I said, grading on a curve means that the ones that are at the top, these are simply more intelligent than the ones below it. There are some races in the game that barely even function at a coherent level. They don't know how to utilize their own campaign mechanics. They flounder about, and they almost always have no late game presence whatsoever. Only by some miracle that they're just left alone will they usually exist, and they are never presenting any real late game challenge. Whereas the ones that are in the cunning section, these are the ones that utilize their campaign mechanics, they're intelligent-ish within their diplomacy, and they're able to form up properly on the battlefield and present themselves as being challenging for the player more often than the ones down here. We're taking the whole of a race into consideration when ranking them, which is why we don't have a distinction between each individual faction, within some exceptions. So, for example, the entirety of the Beastmen is just represented by Kazrak's faction icon there. And that is the case with most of them. However, if we'll have a look here at the Lizardmen, we've got this one here to represent all the Lizardmen, and then make a distinction specifically for Nakai the Wanderer, largely because he's a Horde. He functions differently, he utilizes his mechanics differently, and so I wanted to make a distinction with them. Same thing with Golgfag Maneater, and also with the Deceivers, because they do function differently. In fact, this one here, these two are going to have a very distinct difference between how I'm going to rank their intelligence. Okay, so let's get into it, starting with the entirety of the Beastmen. So all 4 of them here, I'm going to rank them all as... They all function basically the same, but certain factions are more likely to survive than others. For example, Morgr has a higher tendency of surviving, not because he's more intelligent, but because he has a lack of predators near him, basically. Because he starts near Ikitclaw. Ikitclaw has a chance of basically leaving him alone, and Carcassonne is usually too busy dealing with Ikitclaw to worry about Morgr. But Morgr never really expands out or anything. He usually just goes into Athelorn and just keeps dying over and over again before someone finally captures his Herdstone. But basically, all of the Beastmen, I'm going to rank them as brain dead, because I actually think the Beastmen, when controlled by the player, is actually one of the strongest factions in the game. And the AI has absolutely no clue whatsoever. Like, this is probably one of the biggest distinctions between player competency and AI competency in Total War Warhammer 3. AI-controlled Beastmen are fucking stupid as hell. They never get more than 1 Herdstone. They never get more than 1 army. And they only ever complete their Ritual of Ruination once, which is usually not enough in order to get the actual, another, what's it called? Army, so that they can actually present some sort of challenge. So they're, of all the races in the game, this is one of the weakest to go up against. pretty much at any point of the campaign. They'll only ever present an early game challenge, and they're pretty much wiped out universally within the late stage of the campaign. They are so incompetent on the campaign side of things that I think that Creative Assembly just forgot to friggin' program them, because they basically just capture their initial herdstone and then sit there for the entirety of the campaign until somebody decides to fucking squash them. They're so unbelievably stupid. On the battlefield, they're alright. You know, they've got a diverse roster. Most of it just revolves around just YOLOing into the enemy, and you know, the AI in the battlefield, if it has to do that, that's not particularly intelligent, but at least it can do that. But because it only has like one army, and they tend not to recruit particularly good units until very late stage of the campaign, which they usually don't survive that long, they're very rarely presenting any serious world threat. That's super, super rare, and they're never like anything more than like one herdstone. So yeah, brain dead AI on the Beastmen. As for Bretonia, these they don't have as much tools to juggle as the Beastmen. So they do better than the Beastmen. They usually at least have some presence on the campaign map. Alberic kind of has a high chance of getting wiped out in Lustria. Repance usually kind of survives, maybe. It just depends on how late in the campaign and what random factors occur. Khorne usually survives. In fact, sometimes even takes out Be'lakor by himself, you know, as the AI. Going up against AI Be'lakor, that is. So I'd say that the AI for Bretonia is passable, but they don't ever do anything particularly intelligent, because they don't really have interesting mechanics to utilize. So Bretonia rework when. They're just really basic bitch. They just don't really fumble in the same way that the Beastmen do. They utilize their mechanics, limited as they are. They utilize their entire roster. They're predictable in terms of how they behave in diplomacy. Passable AI, basically. Sort of like kind of feels like a placeholder AI in many ways. Okay, then Chaos Dwarfs. So with the Chaos Dwarfs, they usually do present some degree of late game challenge, unless specifically the player takes them out. Now, there is a degree of cheats associated, they just get a lot of resources, but it largely depends on what difficulty. I'm going to try not to take into consideration like excessive AI cheats. Like, in my opinion, some races get more cheats than others, and I feel like the Chaos Dwarfs is one that gets a bit extra, but in terms of how they allocate their resources, they usually do fairly well. They build up their supply of actual Chaos Dwarf units. Sometimes they will absolutely spam out a whole bunch of Hobgoblins, that is true, but they will also utilize their actual campaign mechanics on top of that. They'll have Dreadquake Mortar battery abilities extending out. Sometimes they will build a factory where they should have built a tower, so that's actually a point against them. And on the battlefield, they can present they're usually fairly strong. I don't think that they're worthy of cunning. I'm going to put them at adept. I think that it's like reasonable intelligence from them, you know, for Total War AI. Okay, then Daniel the Demon Prince. So this is a race, there's only one faction within this race, that is extremely limited in terms of what it has available to it. It starts off in a fairly safe location, and very rarely does Daniel the Demon Prince ever present a late game serious threat. He's usually only a threat if you start near him. But his faction is very limited in their actual capabilities. But one big thing that he does have at his disposal that is a major threat once he unlocks it is teleport stance. So that means, like, even though his faction sucks, so I don't think anyone's going to really disagree that much with it. There'll be some diehard Daniel supporters, and that's fine. You know, compared to the other races, that is, the Demon Prince is shit. But in terms of how he utilizes what limited abilities he does have, he does get his equipment over time. He will conquer his neighbors, and he's useless in diplomacy, but at least he'll utilize the various different God's effect, especially teleport stance, like I said, that is available to him. So I'm going to put him at adept. That doesn't mean the faction is strong. It just means that at least this race here, this faction, kind of makes the best of a bad situation. Definitely needs a rework, but the AI for it is reasonably competent. Okay, then we move on to the Dark Elves. So the Dark Elves, I think, are also another really strong race. And the AI really kind of flounders a hell of a lot with the Dark Elves. They are somewhat dangerous. They usually do present a late game challenge, but the Dark Elves, when controlled by the player, are potentially one of the strongest races in the game. one of the big weaknesses is their diplomacy. Everyone hates them, but the Black Arcs is something that is gives the player a big advantage, and that's something that the AI actually still can't utilize. And this has been a problem ever since Total War Warhammer 2. The AI Black Arcs never attack port settlements. They never utilize them to just go out into the sea and raid. So I kind of feel like this race here hasn't actually been adequately programmed. The only thing the AI uses the Black Arcs for is basically sea protection, and also for recruitment. So they can certainly be annoying to wipe out just because of if they've got a Black Arc out in the water, having to go out and get rid of it while it just keeps pumping out new armies is annoying for sure, but that's largely due to the strength of the faction, not the intelligence of the decisions they're making. They tend to manage their slaves extremely poorly, and yeah, they really fumble their actual decisions that they need to make. And on the battlefield as well, especially if they've got lots of dark shards, they could be extremely stupid, constantly blobbing them up, utilizing their I can't remember what it's called, dark conduit, that's it. They utilize their dark conduit way too early on a single entity. They don't know how to utilize their own mechanics very well whatsoever. So I feel like the Dark Elves kind of need to have a helmet when unsupervised. They're not very intelligent. They're very strong, but they're very, very fucking stupid. So if these guys here had a brain, they would truly present themselves to be a serious late game threat in every single one of these campaigns. But they rely too heavily on cheats and just being a really strong faction, and the fact that they don't utilize their Black Arcs to attack port settlements is just beyond stupid. Anyway, so now we move on to the Dwarfs. The Dwarfs are also a very strong faction, but the Dwarfs will almost always present themselves as some degree of late game threat. There are some exceptions, some degree of randomization where all the Dwarfs get wiped out by other AI factions. That's quite rare to occur. One thing, though, with the Dwarfs is that they don't utilize all of their mechanics. I don't think I ever really see AI Dwarf factions build the Deeps. Never see it happen, which is a big shame because that is potentially such a powerful mechanic. So that's just something that they're just not programmed how to utilize whatsoever. Also, with the exception of Thorak Ironbrow, they hardly ever decide to actually focus on Oath Gold. So they never make their actual items in their in the forge, with the exception of Thorak Ironbrow. He seems to be the only one that ever focuses on actually getting like character runes or anything. When they take a settlement, they always focus on building the economic building that isn't providing Oath Gold, like 100% of the time. So this is a faction that it's strong, but it hasn't been programmed well enough to utilize its own mechanics very well. Now, on the battlefield, the Dwarves actually make so many stupid decisions. It's actually quite ridiculous. The reason they're a threat is because they've just got a very strong roster. So actually, the Dwarves, they're actually quite stupid in terms of how they've been programmed. But again, they're compensated by extreme amount of strength, good economy and everything, but they're not utilizing their mechanics the way that they should. They're not getting their runes and stuff in the forge, and they're not constructing the deeps at all. So I think they need an AI improvement. So yeah, needs a helmet when unsupervised, because otherwise they'll hurt themselves. Okay, so next up is the Empire. So the Empire has got some varied mechanics. Each Empire faction has got their own unique thing now, from Karl Franz all the way to Elspeth. And I feel as though the AI doesn't really utilize their own campaign mechanics very much. So I'm not 100% sure about this, but I don't ever see, what's his name, Marcus Wolfhart ever really progress through his threat system. I never see, I think he just gets a free pass on that. And I never see him actually recruit his special recruitment that he gets from when he's completing certain degrees of threat. So I feel like he just gets a pass on that mechanic, because that is a complicated mechanic to use and can be quite challenging. And so the AI they just have that turned off, basically. I don't really see Karl Franz utilizing his essentially changing of the ways. I don't see Balthazar Gelt utilizing his mechanics very well. I don't see Elspeth using her mechanics very well. Nor do I, it would be a little bit challenging to have Volkmar the Grim actively go and search the world for the Books of Nagash. And I'm fairly sure unless the player is actually going after the Books of Nagash, the Books of Nagash are actually turned off. So basically the Empire just doesn't really utilize their own campaign mechanics whatsoever across all the different factions. In terms of Whether or not they present a late game presence, they usually do across all of them. I mean, random things can happen and they get wiped out. It happens. It can be true of just about every race in this game. They tend to be pretty poor on the battlefield in terms of utilizing tactics. If there's any sort of early game missile units in their army, the Empire AI is incredibly stupid. So I'm going to be putting the Empire AI as needs a helmet when unsupervised. They're very unintelligent in how they function. Again, they do present themselves in the late stage of the campaign, largely due to not being completely hated by everyone, backed up by some degree of alliances, and also just AI cheats that to sort of compensate them for their stupidity. But them not utilizing their campaign mechanics makes them an uninteresting opponent to go up against. Okay, then we've got Grand Cathay. I feel like Grand Cathay utilizes their mechanics reasonably well. They'll send out caravans pretty much by default. They don't really attempt to protect them that much, but there's not really much they could do to protect them. There's not a huge amount of incentive to take out a caravan anymore. It used to be super good to smash a caravan with 4 armies, but now it's like, just let it go, unless I'm specifically at war with them. I don't really see Yuan Bo utilize his main campaign mechanic too much, but that being said, if he did, it would be overpowered because he has one of the most powerful ones in the game. But he always at least exists in that area, doesn't get wiped out super early, even though Skulltaker is in that general area. So I feel like Cathay's AI is passable. They usually present themselves reasonably well in the battlefield. They're a lot better than the Empire in terms of how the AI performs. So yeah, I'm going to put them at passable, but they're not particularly intelligent. They don't do a whole lot of ambushing. They don't really. Basically, these guys don't fuck up my plans very much. They're a kind of a predictable faction to occur on the battlefield and on the campaign, regardless of whether they're a natural enemy or a natural ally. Okay, so then we've got Khorne. So this one's an interesting one because Khorne is, in my opinion, the strongest race in the game, without a doubt, especially Skulltaker. The stuff that you can do with Khorne when controlled by the player is just absolutely insane. Now, it's kind of unreasonable to expect that the AI would be able to cope with that because a lot of the finesse of Khorne requires you to fight these battles manually, which the AI is unable to do unless you are present to fight that battle manually. And so the Khornate factions, they definitely present themselves in the late stage of the campaign. Skulltaker, Scarbrand, and Arbal both thrive throughout the campaign. It's very rare for them to get completely wiped out by another AI faction. It does happen though. I think Arbal is the most likely to get wiped out, which is a bit strange, depending on how far away you start from him. I do find as well that the AI cheats that certain factions get largely depends on which faction you are. So other evil factions will get less cheats if you're playing as an evil faction. But if you're playing as Kislev, for example, as the Ice Court, then Arbal is likely to get mega cheats. And so he'll present himself to be a lot more of a threat in that case. That's on the higher difficulties, obviously. They do at least utilize their campaign mechanics. They will make blood hosts. They will utilize the skulls for the Skull Throne. And they'll go out there and they'll blow up settlements. They're not super proficient at it, but these can be... There's actually quite a lot of layers to really mastering Khorne. And while you wouldn't really kind of expect a Total War AI to be able to cope with it, the AI for Khorne is quite reasonable. It's a very strong race. They don't really present themselves as the number one faction usually, but the fact that they at least juggle their mechanics reasonably well, they're very strong on the battlefield because their armies are very simple to use. Basically, their AI is actually competent, but I would not go so far as to call them cunning. So I'm going to put them at adept. I couldn't put them any further than that because they're not that smart. But at least they handle their mechanics reasonably well. And they build up their settlements, they blow up settlements, and they expand. So that's better than some of these factions down here. Okay, then we got Greenskins. Now, Greenskins is a bit of a weird one because this is a faction that I do quite enjoy. Like, I'm a Greenskin hater. Let's just put it that way. I hate the Greenskins. I really don't like them. They're one of my least favorite factions. I'm definitely a hater of them. But when going up against Greenskins, they are pretty good. They do get a lot of cheats. So we need to take that out of consideration. But the AI Greenskins, they utilize their campaign mechanics. So they'll utilize scrap. They'll use a lot of scrap. They'll utilize Grom the Paunches mechanic with the foods. They will constantly expand. They'll be aggressive. They basically behave exactly as you would expect a greenskin to behave. They're super belligerent. You can't trust them in diplomacy. I wouldn't expect them to. They attack anyone around them basically, and they utilize their wars as well. Well, the main greenskin factions do. Minor greenskin factions don't call wars, and they actually utilize their wars on the battlefield as well. I reckon greenskins can be one of the most underestimated factions to go up against on the battlefield. They definitely, just like any other faction, they're just as easy to be ambushed, to get smashed, all that kind of stuff. But they utilize their mechanics. They go into raid stands. They do a lot of plundering. They blow up. They sack settlements, and they behave exactly the way the greenskins should behave. And so it's with great pain that I have to put the greenskin AI as cunning, because they're cunningly brutal or brutally cunning. I'm not entirely sure, but it's one of the two. The AI for the greenskins is actually quite good. They've been programmed correctly, in my opinion, both on the battlefield and on the campaign map. As much as I fucking hate that race, they're a good opponent. Okay, so next up, Kislev. I feel like Kislev does pretty well. They have a lot of hurdles to overcome, but they recruit decent armies. They vary their armies out. They recruit their heroes. They utilize their campaign mechanics. I am seeing them utilize Ataman, so their garrisons are able to sally out. I don't give them the opportunity to do so, but you know, if you click on a Kislevite settlement when you're not playing as that faction, and you can see like a purple zone of control out there, you know that they've got an Ataman attached, and they can sally out their armies that way. So they're utilizing their rework. They don't like none of these races really confederate with one another. They sort of turned that off for Total War Warhammer 3. Well, within the major factions. So it would be interesting to see if Cathay as the AI would confederate what's his name, Castalton, and her dad if he ever survives. But overall, I feel like the Kislevite AI is pretty competent. It behaves as it should in diplomacy. It tends to be a pretty unreliable ally, though, as in you are a military ally with it, you declare war on someone, and then sometimes they go, I'm not joining you. And I think that's largely due to them deciding that I'm overwhelmed, or they're overwhelmed, and they just can't take on anymore. But the AI doesn't consider other AI betrayals to be unreliable, so they never give them any sort of penalties for that, apart from just like minor relation penalties. So overall, I think that Kislev, they're adept. They're okay. They do pretty well, utilizing the tools that they've got available to them, especially in the early stage of the campaign. They present reasonably intelligent. They're not doing anything ridiculously stupid like the Beastmen do. They've just got a lot of challenges around them. At least for Cathay and for Castalton. Like, Castalton, 50% of the time, pretty much gets wiped out, but it's not due to him being stupid, it's due to him going up against multiple major factions straight away. Okay, so now we move on to a faction that's got two different, or race that's got two different categories here. So starting with just like all the Lizardmen except for Nakai the Wanderer, I feel like the Lizardmen are passable. They do okay. They don't really utilize any of their unique mechanics. Like, you never see Oxyotl teleport around. So I don't think he has access to that mechanic. But that being said, if he did have that, that would kind of make him a pain in the ass. Like, what if you were playing as Arbal, for example, and like the first mission from the old ones was from the AI Oxyotl was to go and kill one of your lords. And you just all of a sudden, in the middle of the end turn, boom, you get attacked by Oxyotl, and you've only got half a stack, and he brings in a full stack of skinks, chameleon skinks. That'd be a bit of bullshit for the player if something like that happened. So I imagine they just turned that off. So that's kind of understandable. But as for the other ones, like Tehenowin doesn't really utilize his sacrifices. I very rarely see him utilize that at all, if at all. Don't see, well, Itza never starts off with Croak when not controlled by the player, and the Lizardmen, they flounder about a little bit, but that's largely due to the difficulty of their starting position, not necessarily their own stupidity, because pretty much universally they've got difficult opponents to deal with right from the get-go. So I'm gonna put that at passable. They do all right, but nothing spectacular with the Lizardmen. At least they usually exist within the late stage of the campaign. And on the battlefield, they can be quite a challenge because they have a very sort of simple roster, melee infantry and missile units. And their missile units are usually monsters anyway, so they usually just charge them in and they're reasonably competent. It's kind of a simple faction in terms of their military roster. They've got a lot of variety, but the variety is very samey. It's like, oh, that's a different type of monster. There's another monster. Well, that's an anti-large monster. Here's an anti-infantry monster. They all just charge into anything basically. Okay, but when it comes to Nakai the Wanderer, because he's a horde, we have to take things into a different consideration. Now, if this was Warhammer 2, I would have put him at brain dead. Nakai just never survives. But as the AI in Warhammer 3, Nakai actually can present himself to be quite a challenge. And he recruits new armies. He tries to get as many of the settlements for his vassal as possible. I don't ever see him ever get more than like a handful of settlements, but I have seen him with multiple armies. Wiping out one army usually means that there's another one, so you got to go find that one and kill it as well. So I'd say that it's quite competent. I'm going to put him at adept because Nakai the Wanderer can actually pose quite a big threat, and he'll usually attack you when you're not expecting it or when you're not ready for him. He's reasonable in diplomacy. You can negotiate with him and his vassal. So unless, of course, you're evil, he's probably not going to negotiate with you then. But I feel like the AI for Nakai the Wanderer is actually pretty good, especially compared to the other Lizardmen AI, which I feel like is a bit basic. Okay, then we've got the Norskins. Norskins don't have a whole lot of tools to work with. I don't think that they have monster hunts because what are they going to do? Auto-resolve it? So they just, at regular intervals, get access to, I guess, the regiments of renown that get unlocked by it. But I don't ever see them get the unique items from the monster hunts. So I think that that's just turned off. I don't really know if their favor system works for the AI because they very rarely play into it. Like if they blow up a settlement, that's not enough. Like 1 or 2 settlements not enough to even trigger the first stage of it. And the first stage of it would usually just give them some like economic bonuses. So it's really hard to say if they're utilizing their campaign mechanic, but typically speaking, that seems to be something that the player would focus on rather than them. Plus another thing is that doing the monster hunts is something that you can contribute a hell of a lot to that main campaign mechanic. Now I expect that the Norskins will get a pretty hefty rework coming soon-ish, October, November, December, January, who knows when it's going to be delayed to. So it may improve, but we don't know for certain until it actually comes out. But I feel like with the tools that they have at their disposal, they're like passable. They exist. Like Throg, he starts next to Malachi. Next to Malachi Macason, and Throg is a big mismatch there because if he brings in lots of flying units, the Norskins don't have a whole lot of early game flying units. So Throg could definitely get wiped out quite early, but Wulfric usually survives and he does his raiding. He can get reasonably big, but nothing like an endgame crisis type scenario. So I'm going to put them at passable. They're on the battlefield. They're reasonably competent. They spread out their forces and charge at the enemy. They're predictable, but at least they're competent. They don't do shit like what the Empire does, where they put their artillery in front of the trees because they have no friggin' terrain awareness, and blob up their infantry so that they can't shoot properly. That's something that I see the Empire do all the time, and that's largely because the Norskins can't do that stuff anyway. They don't have artillery except for a hell cannon, I guess. But yeah, they don't do that stuff, and they don't rely on it so much either. But what they do have, they're competent with it. It's a lot easier for the AI to utilize a melee-focused army than with missiles, because missiles are a bit more complicated. You got to take into consideration trajectory, terrain, and the AI just doesn't have terrain awareness at all. And when it comes to melee, they don't need as much terrain awareness. So it's a lot lower bar for the Norskins to be passable than the Empire. That being said, the Empire is less intelligent now than it was in Warhammer 2. Like, they are so bad at utilizing their like infantry and archer-based armies. They're just really bad at it. Okay, now we move on to the High Elves. So with the High Elves, I feel like a high bar is needed because this is a very strong race. I don't think that they utilize their influence mechanic whatsoever. I don't think they ever influence other nations. The major factions don't confederate with one another anymore. They used to. That was a big deal in Total Warhammer 2. And they will get traits from their lords and heroes that require influence, but I feel like they just get freebies. They don't actually pay for it with influence because they never send out their nobles to specifically go and get influence. And it seems as though whenever, like if you're playing as a high elf faction and you confederate another high elf faction, they never seem to have any of the negative, like the bad traits that don't require influence. So I feel like they just get a whole bunch of freebies in order to compensate for them not having to utilize their own campaign mechanics. So them getting that freebie, that's a point down for them because they're just getting a free pass on a mechanic. They're not playing the game in the same way that the player is. This is why I gave the Greenskins a high mark, because they play the game the exact same way that the player does. They call a war. They can't call it all the time. They probably get some cheats to it, but they have to build it back up before they can call another one. They can't over recruit their wars. Like they can't get larger wars than their base army. They utilize scrap, and they utilize their in-battle war system. So basically just utilize the exact same mechanics the player does. That's why I put them up this way. And so factions that don't play the same way as the player, because the AI just gets a free pass on it, you're going to get a lower score. The High Elves can present themselves as a late-game challenge if they manage to take out Nakai fairly early, which sometimes happen. I feel like Nakai survives a bit later than he used to. Usually the High Elves are done with him very early on. But overall, I feel like the intelligence of the High Elves is actually quite low when they're using mixed formations. Like they're using infantry and archers. They will quite often blob up their archers, much like how the Empire does. It's basically utilizing the same stuff. They're much better when they start utilizing their monsters. So I'm gonna put them at needs a helmet when unsupervised, because the bar is higher for them because they are a strong race, and in my opinion they underperform due to stupid decisions. Now they're very reliable in diplomacy, which kind of also makes them stupid, making them so predictable. Like if they hate you, they will declare war on you, and if they like you, they won't declare war on you. And there's basically no exceptions to that, except for unreliability. So very, very basic AI is performed, I think, on the High Elves across the board. They're all very basic. That doesn't mean they're not necessarily a challenge just because their race is strong. They're just not making smart decisions on the campaign or the battlefield. Again, until they get to that late stage of the campaign with the battlefield, that is. Okay, so previously, I would have called the ogres brain dead because they almost always died straight away. However, when Omens of Destruction came out, it does seem as though the ogres do a lot better, especially Greasus. One thing, though, and I'm not sure if this has been patched out yet, I don't know if it's considered intelligent, the fact that they can kind of do an exploit where they can put down multiple camps in the same region. I think that may have gotten patched out, but I'm not entirely sure. But it was pretty funny seeing like 6 ogre camps in one region, which is not allowed to be done. But they will utilize their camps and put them around all over the place. They will recruit good armies. They'll utilize a lot of variety, and they present themselves as reasonable challenges up to the late stage of the campaign. Now, I had to make a distinction in regard to Goldtooth. No, sorry, not Goldtooth. Golg Maneater. Goldtooth, this one. Golg Maneater, because even though he's technically a settled faction, like he can occupy territory, Golg is different case scenario. So these ones here usually perform about the same, like Scrag takes the border prince's territory and then usually ends up in a conflict with the Dwarfs, puts up a bit of a fight before eventually getting squashed. And Goldtooth ends up going up against Grimgor. If not Grimgor, then Tamrakhan. If not Tamrakhan, then Kugath Blackfather. And that will present a fair bit of challenge to him. But he usually survives a lot longer than he used to. So I'm going to put the Ogre AI at passable. They seem to utilize their mechanics to some degree, except for Greasus with his cheats, which I kind of understand why not, because it just depends, because some of those tyrant actions that he can do are very friggin' overpowered. So it's probably best if some of them don't activate all the time, especially if you start near him. But yeah, I feel like it's passable at least. They act as though the ogres should, I think. But when it comes to Golg Maneater, brain dead. Absolutely fucking catatonic right from the get-go. So usually what happens with Golg Maneater is that he starts off in Ostland, And when controlled by the player, you're supposed to be able to teleport around to various different contracts. But when controlled by the AI, you can't give him contracts. You can negotiate with him, but usually he's just standing near Castle von Ruko. I can't remember. One of those settlements in Ostland. He's usually just standing there and stays there doing nothing for like 10, 20, 30 turns on end until someone declares war on him or he declares war on them. And just sits on his fat fucking ass doing nothing. That is so ridiculously stupid. So this is that faction that basically, like, I have seen him occupy territory before, but in most of the campaigns, usually when I get to that area, he's just sitting there doing nothing. And in fact, he's so fucking lazy and stupid. Usually Oko Ironbelly, the butcher, I think, or I can't remember. The hero that he starts off with is usually still standing in the exact same place that he was at the very first turn. So the AI for this is basically just turned off. It just doesn't work at all for the most part. It just sits there doing nothing. So yeah, definitely brain dead for that. Again, that's most of the time. Sometimes he actually activates, but from all the campaigns I've seen, it's more often than not that he just goes, oh, it's turn 1, and then just does nothing for the rest of the campaign until someone goes, all right, let's just get rid of him because he's sitting here raiding and being potentially aggressive. Because yeah, he'll declare war on you the moment you leave a settlement unguarded, but outside of that, he just sits there on his fat ass doing nothing, which is not what he should be doing. He should be going out there. I feel like you should be able, in diplomacy, to be able to negotiate with him and actually hire him as a contractor. The way that it works for him when you play as him. Oh, it would be good to see him teleport around to some degree. But again, it could be overpowered if that does happen. Maybe that's why they turned it off. But at the same time, he just doesn't do anything on the campaign when played by the AI. Okay, so Nurgle. Nurgle is not the strongest race in the game by a long shot, but I find that all of their factions do a reasonably good job except for Epidemius. And I think Epidemius usually sits around doing nothing, largely because they're actually surrounded by friendly factions for the most part. Like to his east, he's got the Demon Prince. He's not really incentivized to go up against the Demon Prince, and so he doesn't go that way. The Demon Prince usually takes out his initial enemy, which is the Tzeentch faction. And then to his west, he's got a faction that basically is just way stronger than him. And that's, what's his name? Mal's Darkblade. So Epidemius usually does nothing, largely due to lack of nearby enemies. But Tamarkan gets his shit going pretty much every single time. The vast majority of saving disaster battles that you guys sent in, it's against Tamarkan. Super friggin' strong, but it's not necessary that they're making intelligent decisions. He's just super ridiculously bloody strong. They will create plagues, so they'll utilize their own campaign mechanic. They're not particularly good at it. They tend to make very stupid plagues with random effects rather than thinking intelligently about them, but at least they will make plagues, and they will do that quite frequently. Very rarely, or basically never, will you see them make a cultist and then send it far flung. They usually create a cultist and then just use it straight away. So I don't think they're super intelligent by any means, but I think that they're at a passable level. One thing as well is that Tamarkan's mechanic with his chieftains, the AI does actually utilize that. So as he progresses through the campaign, he will get more of his chieftains, and the traits that they get throughout the campaign, they will slowly start to accumulate. So he does activate his own campaign mechanic. So there are some factions in the game, like I said, that don't utilize their campaign mechanic. They're basically just placeholder factions on the game, really. So Nurgle is not like that, so they get passable. But I don't think they make particularly intelligent decisions one way or another. So I'm going to put that. Things are bad when Greenskins are at the top. I think that's largely because their faction is so simple to deal with. The bar is low for them, but they pass the bar, basically. Okay, then the Skaven. So here's an interesting one. So ranking all the Skaven at the same, because all of them utilize their campaign mechanics, with the exception of maybe Tzeentch. And that's because Tzeentch is bullshit, basically, if he was utilizing that. That and Throt doesn't utilize it that often, but he at least starts off with it. Ikaclaw definitely uses it. He will routinely get more nukes. And I'm going to rank the Skaven AI as cunning. This is one of the most dangerous opponents that you can face in Total Warhammer, because they will ambush you, they'll sneak around, they'll backstab you the moment that you leave yourself an opportunity to come at you. They'll have a non-aggression pact with you. They'll just straight up declare war on you. So you cannot trust them whatsoever. They behave basically exactly as the Skaven should. They actually utilize their mixed army formations reasonably well. They can be an endgame crisis as well. This is a race that usually exists in the late stages of the campaign because they are so fucking dangerous, especially to other AI, because they will just ambush them. And when you ambush an opponent, you get an auto-resolve boost, so that helps them out a fair bit. Their early game armies are trash, and yet they still do a pretty damn good job of it. So all 6 of the Skaven that exist, never turn your back on them, and just be very careful because they are actually quite intelligent. They'll build up their settlements, they'll actually put down undercities in various locations. Like all of a sudden you just have an undercity pop up out of nowhere sometimes, and that could be because they just spread it along the place. So yeah, they will build buildings in the undercities. They're not the best in terms of when they want to build a Rat King, which is the Vermintide building that causes an army to spawn and attack, because what they should be doing is trying to make it so it's less detection first, and they usually just go right ahead and build the Rat King building, which makes it detectable, which makes it easy to destroy. That's probably one area where they're not particularly intelligent. But the fact that they utilize them... Okay, they don't utilize food, though. So that's something that they just get a free pass on. So whenever they occupy a settlement, they always just bring it down straight to tier 1. So that's probably some area that would give them a drop down in points. It's just that if they didn't ambush so many people all the damn time and were such a threat on the campaign map and to a degree on the battlefield, because they got so many good units, like their Warp Lightning abilities, the AI utilizes Warp Lightning super friggin' well. It also utilizes Howling Warp Gale very well, so they're good at using their spells, they're good at using their heroes, they're good at using most of their units, not all the time, but relative to Total War Warhammer, looking at you, Empire. The Skaven are pretty damn intelligent comparatively. Okay, then we've got Slaanesh. So only Nakai within this race at the moment. Nakai has got some very powerful mechanics in terms of the devotee mechanic, and they don't really make use of it very well. Like he will create devotee armies, but they tend to just sit around in his own territory doing nothing. So I'm gonna put Nakai as needs a helmet when unsupervised. He's a lot stronger than what the AI utilizes, and I don't feel like his mechanics are that complicated. Also, the fact that you can besiege a settlement, they'll seduce a unit, and it's like, oh, I don't want that unit seduced, and then just lay off the siege and then go back at it, and then they'll just decide not to seduce a unit. It's kind of stupid that they'll just randomly decide, you know what, I'm not going to seduce a unit this time. So they've definitely got some huge gaps in their intelligence there, so that's why I think they need a bit of a helmet. Also they've got bit soft skulls there, these guys, so they need a bit of assistance. And unfortunately, nobody's there to assist them, which is usually why Nakai gets wiped out, most often. Okay, then we've got Tzeentch. So this is just Kairos Fate Weaver, because there's only 2 Tzeentchian factions. So Kairos Fate Weaver, where am I going to put him? I'm going to put him at Cunning, because he utilizes the campaign mechanics that he has, the changing of the ways. Very annoying when he does that shit to you and swaps your settlements and stuff like that. Very, very annoying, but that's Cunning. In diplomacy, he hates everyone, and everyone hates him. His armies are super fucking dangerous on the battlefield, and they're very good at utilizing their magics. Tzeentchian spellcasters are so irritating to deal with. It's actually kind of bullshit as well when they use gleam magic on themselves, which they're not supposed to be able to do. So they kind of cheat in regard to that. So that, I don't know how we as a player are supposed to do that, but they draw themselves unlimited magic with that. Super fucking dangerous. They utilize their army abilities really bloody well. They know exactly the right time that you're not looking at your own units to drop down the huge bombardments, and they'll utilize all of their mechanics to the fullest extent. They're usually a massive threat when going up against it. Their armies are difficult to deal with, and even though they've got a fair few missile units, they utilize them pretty damn well. So Kairos Fate Weaver's faction is something that you should be very careful about when dealing with. One of my least favorite factions to go up against, because they're very difficult to to fuck up. To get them to do something stupid. They'll use teleport stance on you routinely, so you got to be very bloody careful around them, because you can't block teleport stance. You can't just go into a camp stance, because it's 100% success no matter what, unless you're sitting inside the settlement or they can't see you if you're in ambush stance, but if they pull you out of it, then they can see you. Or if you're out at sea, they can't use ambush stance, teleport stance on you in there. But you've got to be very careful around Kairos. Alternately, with the Changeling is brain dead. He basically just like Golgfag Maneater. He's got some of the most powerful mechanics in the entire game. His faction is more powerful than Kairos' Fate Weavers, and he just sits there in Stirland and does nothing. Usually hidden, because he starts off with some trickster cults and just sits there. And every now and again, you might be walking past and he'll declare war on you and ambush you. And you might think to yourself, fuck, that was annoying. But he's a little bitch, basically. That's the extent of what he'll do. Doesn't expand out, doesn't go out and search for more tricksters cults. And in fact, if his army gets wiped out, he'll never recruit another one. This AI is probably, and you know what, I'm going to put it as the worst programmed AI faction in the entire game. Now, I imagine that the only explanation I can give for this is that area is so concentrated with legendary lords that if the AI was half as competent as it should be, the Empire is basically too difficult of a faction to play for most players, and they want it to be at least playable. So they basically turn this AI off so that it is playable. But yeah, this AI here just doesn't function. If you can manage to get them visible and wipe out that army, then you'll never see them again. It's actually really ridiculously stupid just how unintelligent the deceivers are compared to Kairos Fate Weaver. It's like complete night and day. These guys are active throughout the entire campaign, doing all these things, playing the game, and this one is just not playing any games at all. Just sits there and be like, how can I annoy the player? I'll just wait for an opportunity, and if that opportunity never shows up, well, never happens. Fucking stupid moron, basically. Anyway, so moving on to the Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings, they'll utilize their mechanics, but Tomb Kings are kind of slow going. They're kind of weak at the moment. It is good to see that they will at least play by the same rules as the player, even if they get a bit of cheats. They're limited in the number of armies that they can get. So as the game progresses, they will get more armies, but because they usually don't expand very far, they usually end up not having enough research rate to get that many armies, so it's very likely that they'll get wiped out by their neighboring factions. Rapance usually wipes out Archon, Khorne, Scarbrand usually wipes out what's his face, Cetra, which is disappointing because Cetra rules, and so on and so forth. The Tomb King factions, they very rarely present themselves in the late game. Surprisingly enough, though, it's usually Khalida that at least survives until the late stage of the campaign, and that might be largely due to diplomacy and her being able to not end up in a war with Thorak Ironbrow or the Last Defenders, and largely because the Last Defenders have got other bigger threats to deal with. But in terms of how intelligent the Tomb Kings are, I don't think that they're particularly good. They're not brain dead by any means. I'm going to put them at needs a helmet when unsupervised. I don't think it's particularly good. Okay, then we've got the Warriors of Chaos. So here's the thing with them. They pretty much always exist into the late stage of the campaign, and they're almost always a threat. But this, in my opinion, is one of the strongest factions in the game, and they don't really utilize their mechanics super well. Not as well as they could have, and I don't feel like it's that complicated. So sometimes they will occupy settlements that have absolutely no value to them, and they won't give it to their vassals, even if they could. So you'll sometimes see Archaon have territory that should belong to the Tong that he just took for himself. That there's no value to him whatsoever. I don't know why he did that, but they'll make those mistakes. They don't really actively try to go out and capture dark fortresses that much. I don't think the AI is actually aware of the need for dark fortresses. It's just sometimes Archaon might accidentally capture a dark fortress and go, oh, I'll keep this. So I don't think they're that intelligent. I don't think they really utilize their souls mechanic at all very much. I don't see them doing anything special with that. And once their armies have been wiped out, they usually go, oh shit, well there's nothing left in my area. I have to wait before I can recruit anything. So while they are a very strong race overall, I think the AI for the Warriors of Chaos is actually pretty bad. So I'm going to put it at needs a helmet when unsupervised. Race strong, AI bad, basically. Okay, then we've got... On the battlefield, they're very good, though. I want to make that distinction. But that's largely because it's very simple for them to use their units. They basically just charge on in. Archaon is always a big threat. Any of the Warriors of Chaos on the battlefield are usually pretty damn dangerous. But their campaign capabilities is extremely lacking, given the strengths that is available to them. Okay, then we've got the Vampire Coast. So Vampire Coast, I don't really ever see them become a late-game threat. I think they just barely utilize their mechanics. So they certainly don't go after the sea shanties. And I think that they're basically just passable. They build armies. They'll get some strong units. They will get the ones from the technology tree that have shipbuilding. So they will utilize a little bit, but not as much as I think they should. They never really present a serious late game challenge, except for maybe the High Elves with Nautilus, and that's largely just due to how annoying it is to get to his settlement. But the rest of them, not so much, not particularly intelligent. They just got a lot of tools at their disposal that makes them in the early game quite strong because they can get armies up and running quite quickly. Okay, then we got the Wood Elves. So Wood Elves are extremely dangerous on the battlefield. They don't really go and expand too much, but they're not really supposed to. They kind of act the way that they're supposed to, and they're somewhat isolationist, somewhat. Durthu can definitely declare war on you if you go near him and he hates you. That's definitely a possibility, and they will sometimes expand out that way. Invading Athel Loren is an absolute pain in the ass. Dryka is quite dangerous as well. So I feel like their real strength comes from their battlefield prowess. The Wood Elves AI, I feel like, is actually one of the best out of all of them. So while I wouldn't go so far as to call them cunning, I'd say the Wood Elves are adept. The AI performs pretty damn well with them, especially on the battlefield. Campaign-wise, they're okay. They're adequate. They'll utilize their campaign mechanics. You'll see that... there's only one that has real campaign mechanics, I suppose, and that's the Sisters of Twilight. They will craft those equipment over time, and they will get aerial. Someone will get aerial. For some reason, it's actually usually Durthu these days, as opposed to the Sisters of Twilight. And Dryka will get Coadil. When she was first implemented into the game back in Warhammer 2, she actually would never get Coadil. So it just would be only the player that could get it, but they've since changed that, so that's good. The AI is competent. They don't ever really confederate each other, but that's, again, the case with pretty much all of this. The only rare occasions is that when two Greenskins factions go up against each other, it can happen. Sometimes they will actually, Legendary Lord versus Legendary Lord, and they'll actually confederate. And then we've got the vampire counts. So vampires, they are, I'd say that they're pretty stupid. They have a lot of strength at their disposal, and they've got a lot of things that sort of make them kind of unfair to deal with. Like when they go in and make an attack, they lose the battle, all of their units revive, and then they just attack again. They are extremely stupid in regard to their biggest asset, which is leveling up their characters. That's the biggest strength of vampire counts. Like, their units are not... They've got maybe one of the worst rosters in the entire game. Their characters are their real strength, and they don't utilize them very well. They're always leveling them up badly. You so very rarely see any of their characters actually get Wind of Death, one of the best spells in the entire game. And if they do get Wind of Death, they'll still sit there using Invocation of Nehek on a unit that started off damaged and it isn't healing because it can't quite figure out that it's not actually getting any healing back from it. So they're very... ironically, very bad at using their magic, which is a shame because that is supposed to be their big strength. And the real threat that comes from the vampire counts is the fact that they just have so many resources that are available to them. They can just hire massive shit armies really quickly, and that their legendary lords can be quite dangerous in melee, but they're usually terrible spellcasters. So I'm going to put the vampire counts that actually needs a helmet when supervised, because while they are a threat, they're incredibly stupid, and that's what we're basing all the stuff off here, is how intelligent they are respectively. So that's the tier list there. Now, this is one of those cases where there are actually sort of more on the lower end, only slightly compared to how the upper end, but you will notice it is a bit of a bell curve there. That's what I was hoping to go for here, to get a bit of a relative sort of thing, because we're grading on a curve here. So these, in my opinion, these are the factions that utilize their mechanics the best. They're not necessarily always the strongest factions, but in terms of how the AI behaves, they're very rarely like floundering about, not utilizing their mechanics so much. Whereas these ones here, these are the brain dead ones. They're just non-functional. They're catatonic and they just don't do anything at the campaign map. And these ones here, they just don't utilize the strength that they do have available to them as effectively as they should. They basically should be a bigger threat than they are. And then these ones here, they're just, they're fine, basically. Nothing particularly impressive about them, nor anything particularly stupid, and these ones do a pretty good job. So anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think of my assessment of the AI in Total War Warhammer 3, based, of course, on campaigns and on their battlefields, but I do, I guess, more heavily weigh their campaign decisions as opposed to their battle decisions, because I think the campaign decisions they make has higher weight, because any of these factions can build a strong army, but they don't all make good campaign decisions. Only some of them do. Guys, that's the end of this one. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Don't forget to check out Manscaped, link in the description and pinned comment. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.